Welcome back to the table. Today, Emily and I are going to give you a look at Terminus from Inside Up Games. This is their newest game coming to crowdfunding, and this is also probably their heaviest game that I think I've played. I've played quite a few of their games. I think, well, you've certainly played Earth.
I've played Earth, if you didn't know.
You've played plenty of Earth. But we played Terminus as well recently, and both discovered that there's quite a bit of heavy gaming going on here.
A lot of thinking going on.
A lot of thinking, and some pretty tight gameplay here as well. The economies here are very tight. So this is the board you have out here, and this is, if you couldn't figure it out already, you're building a subway system. And when you're building, this is not exactly, you are building routes. I wouldn't say this is a traditional route building game.
It doesn't feel like that.
It doesn't feel that way. You have agendas and projects that you're trying to achieve. Some are private, some are yours, some are public. But you're going to be wanting to build a network with your rails out there to try to achieve some of those sorts of things by having stations around the board in certain areas and a variety of different things. You're going to be doing this by going around this rondel up here, and this is where the game gets thinky and
interesting.
Tight. You're going to go around this 3 times for 3 rounds, so a total of 9 times around the rondel, stopping at whatever action point you want to take.
Correct.
And those points are going to have a few different actions each that you can take, and you can go to a space even if someone else is there.
Correct.
But this is one of those games where you can take your piece and go as far around it as you want. It is up to you. So if you want to go up here and take this spot, it's not necessarily because you're blocking that spot, but it's about the economy of all these resources, because that gets really tight. And all these actions are going to allow you to do a variety of different things. You'll be able to collect agendas, be able to place some positioning on these project cards, upgrade your player board so that you can do a little bit more, and then ultimately collect a variety of different resources so you can build that system.
Yes, exactly. So before we do anything with the rondel, though, the round starts with a budget phase, which is a little interesting too, because at the top of your board, you have a bonus you get to choose from. And so it's a different collection of resources you're going to be getting to start. So each year, and there's 3 years, you might choose like, okay, this year I want to start with these resources. Next year I'll start with these resources. There's little ways to manipulate that throughout the game too, but at least you start with kind of differing things depending on which one you want, as well as some amount of money, depending on how many stops you've already put out on the board.
Yeah, and as you can see out on the board here, this isn't exactly a game in progress, but it was our best way of simulating that, just to show you kind of what some of the routes look like and what stations look like and whatnot. But you're going to be building your routes in one direction for the most part, unless you've got a certain upgrade. You're going to continually keep going and not looping back on yourself as well. And what else you have here are some developments. The developments are actually going to go out on the board as well. This is a big part of the game. These developments are going to go into their relative districts.
Correct.
And they give you more actions to take that are also associated with these different spots on the rondel. However, you have to have some presence there. Meaning that you've had to have built your rail system to go sort of adjacent to those developments.
Yeah, so they'll give you more options or even sometimes ongoing effects, but you, like David said, have to be building near them in order to be using them as part of your arsenal of things you can do.
Yeah, they feel very much like a card or a tile you might acquire in any other given Euro that you have in front of you. That is like, oh, they have a power that no one else has. Well, it's like that, but it's out here, and you can have it, and someone else can have it. In fact, any 2 people, as long as they've built next to it, can place, using another action, on a development so that they can use that power when they come around to that spot on the rondel.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the rondel. We're just going to go space by space and give you a bit of an overview without a ton of detail on what you're doing here. So this first area is called Develop, and the Develop station is going to let you do a number of different things. You're mainly going to use this to get those developments that we just talked about out on the board. And like I said, to do that, you're going to have to pay one of the permits, and that's one of the resources that you'll collect, and take one of these developments and put it out corresponding in the districts. You can see there's green, red, and blue developments, and those are going to correlate to the different districts out here. You also have to have built a station adjacent to where you're going to place that. So, for instance, if I'm yellow here and I've built this station, I could take one of these green ones, the Knightstown one, and place it, say, right here, because I've built next to it. Now, I would place one of my workers on there as well, signifying that I have this power to use when I round the roundel and use that corresponding spot.
Yep. The other things that's interesting to note is that some of these spots as well in develop and along the board as well are overlapping. So you can do it both on the develop and the next space or the space before it. The other things it allows you to do is like take these demands off, which is basically a point generator in the game. Or you can start moving your guys. So maybe I have a guy out there already and I've decided this power is no longer as useful to me as maybe another power on another development. If I have adjacency to it, I can move him to another space that might be more useful for me now.
Yeah, or even move him over to an agenda you might have, because these agenda cards are cards that you're going to score, but you're only going to score them if you've moved one of your workers on them by the end of the game.
Which is a great segue. So the next spot is lobbying.
Yeah.
And lobbying is where you can get those agendas. So you start with one personal agenda at the beginning of the game. Like mine is hubs within 2 of the specific districts, the Tarragon Hills and Chippers Row. So I might be looking at the board and saying like, okay, I want to make sure I'm building hubs in those 2 places, because if I can at the end, I can get either 3 or 5 points, depending on if I have met the requirements and if I have a lobbyist put on here by the end of the game.
Yeah, and mine is very similar and a little bit easier in some respects and a little bit harder in some respects. Mine can be stations or hubs, and we'll tell you more about the difference of those in a minute. But it can be stations or hubs in 3 different districts that are all together. So you're going to want to build your network in those 3 districts if possible, if you're wanting to score this. And you can potentially go in to get more agendas like we were talking, and you might get agendas that synergize with this very well, that have some of those same districts. Because when you go there, you're actually going to take a number of agendas depending on the round. If it's in the first round, you take 3 and choose 1. But if you wait till the end of the game, which
you take the 1.
Generally is going to benefit you because you know what network you have out here. You only take 1, and that's the one you get.
Exactly. You can only have 3 agendas though in the game.
Yeah.
So you're also thinking about timing of like, do I want to go early and get my choice, or do I want to just wait till late, like David said, so I have something built, but then I don't really get a choice of what I'm taking. The other thing you can do when you're lobbying is you can go to the projects. So the projects are like a shared objective.
Yeah.
So there's 3 of them to start in the game, depending on player count. And the way they work is like the top one's saying it's looking for the number of stops I have. So stops or hubs just anywhere on the board. And if I get to 10 or 12 or 16, depending on how many lobbyists I've put there, I can score different amounts. So right now, I'm not scoring anything. I don't have any lobbyists on it. But on my first time I want to go there, I'm going to have to put 2 separate lobbyists on there, and that's claiming my stake in that and saying like, all right, I'm the only one, I'm one of the 2 people all game who can score that. And if I get at least this many, I'll score this many points. I can keep adding more up to 4 to score more in the end, but I've staked my claim on that project.
Yeah, and that's important to pay attention to, because a lot of this game has a lot of timing going on. And the timing with this, you could go there early.
Sure.
But this is one of the only places, in fact, maybe the only place where you put lobbyists that you can't get them back. They're staying there.
And you only have 8 lobbyists all game. And you want to put them in all these different places to do all these different things. So they are really a commitment when you're putting them to the project.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those places where you're like, I'm going to wait till the next time I go around. And then sure enough, another player might jump your claim there. The next area here, this is where you're going to do a couple different things. It's called the Improve section. And you're going to either buy advanced upgrades, which are these tiles here, or you're going to get some blueprints, which are one of the resources you need to do all of the building. The upgrades are going to go on your player board, and every player starts with a couple basic upgrades that all do the same thing. One of those upgrades is something that's going to let you to build hubs. When you build a station, which again we'll get to in a moment, these are just this 1-layer stations that you put out, like these. If you build a hub, you can build another effectively station on top of a station to make it a hub. That's going to let you score some of those agendas, potentially some of the projects that require hubs.
Right, exactly. The other thing that you can do at the spot right is you can get those advanced upgrades, which are even better, honestly.
Incredibly better and wildly different. These are the sorts of things you see in a lot of games that feel broken. Like,
very broken.
But they're all so wildly powerful that they're all pretty balanced and they do incredibly different things. Some of these will probably make more sense once you understand the full game, but you're able to effectively take a whole nother action on the rondel with some of these actions. At the at any time during your round, you can just go, you know what, I'm going to take this action again. Which again is incredibly powerful. But some of the other ones are just as powerful, but just in different ways.
Exactly. And some of them help with the economy, which is really important. Like there's wild resources or an additional construction all the time, which is important because this economy is a closed economy. And it is very tight.
Yeah, and the first part of that closed economy is these blueprints. As you can see, there are blueprints here. We've got permits, power, and construction. These cubes are what they are.
That's it.
There are no more in the game. So if someone, now this isn't likely, but if someone were to have all of these, and we'll mention in a second why that's not possible, you're not going to get one. Or if people have taken a lot of them, they're going to get more costly because as they're taken or purchased for money, they get more and more costly. And money's very tight. These resources are very tight. And guess what else? Your player board is very tight because you can only hold 8 resources at any given time. So between all 4 of these resources, you only have 8 spaces to hold them. So at the end of your turn, if you've taken more, you have to put some back. It gets very constricting. You have to really plan out, okay, here's exactly what I want to do. Here's exactly how I'm going to spend these resources. And if you don't have the resources, you have to kind of think, what is everyone else going to do? Because they better build this round so that they can pay some of those resources back so that then I can go get them, or maybe at least get them for cheaper.
Exactly, and that's really what happens with the rondel aspect of it, right? So even though that might not be your next action, you might say like, I'm gonna skip over a couple of these because I really need to buy things when they're cheap, buy as much of it as I can because I wanna do this action at a higher cost. But that really stops my competitors from being able to do the same thing because we're all vying for these same resources.
Yeah, and there's decisions that also have to be made. This next section here, this is called the market.
Yes.
The market lets you buy either permits or power, not both. So if you get power and you needed some permits, you're gonna have to go all the way around the rondel again to get those. So there's a lot of decisions you make as you go around this rondel, and sometimes you might want to just go ahead and jump all the way around thinking, okay, I've got 2 more times this round. I just want to build at least once this round.
Sure.
We'll get to in a second because build's the last section. But if you've thought that way, you can kind of plan to not make exactly the most of every single trip around the rondel.
Exactly. And well, you can't make the most of everything, right? Because you only have 8 spots, so I can't load up on too much because I'm going to be stopped by my supply. But there is still yet another resource.
Yes.
So then if you go into the supply, you can get construction. And the way this works is a little bit differently. So instead of it getting more expensive over time, these are always free.
Yes.
You take the whole depot though. So you take a whole column of construction. So the first person who goes there is going to get 4 construction, which is great. Lots of resource.
Half your inventory.
Half my inventory.
It's really kind of, and now I think you'll always want to take as much as you can because you can always give some back and you can always kind of like rectify that at the end of your turn. But it is an interesting situation because sometimes some of these get spent and put back, so there's only 1 here.
Yes.
So then you come to that place and you're like, well, I don't want to just take that whole action to get 1 construction. And you're hoping for more to come back there. It's an interesting decision. The other things you can do at this station is to get some of the rails.
Yes.
This is where you can spend money to get more rails off your player board onto your player board because those are the only rails you can use during your action. Then the last one is the build. The build section here lets you do sort of the meat and potatoes of this game.
Yes. Yeah, so when you're building, you're actually going to finally get to take your stops and put them out onto the board. You're going to need to have rails, though, and you're going to need to have stops. The way you get stops, too, is dependent on your capacity. So we didn't talk, too, about how in the supply phase, you can use that construction to move your capacity up further and further, but sometimes it'll cost just construction, and sometimes it'll cost construction plus power.
Right.
But it's hard because that same action where you get construction, if you want to use it to use that construction, you have to go again all the way around. So maybe you do. Maybe you just say, I'm going to skip a lap and come right back to use them. Or maybe you try to take a slower route. But as long as you have those rails and the capacity enough for more stops, you can start building onto the board. It will cost you, though, right?
Yes.
So it's going to cost you at least a permit and 2 construction plus a blueprint for you to take the action to start.
Yeah, the permit and the construction that you spend is 1 permit, 2 construction. That's basically payment for access to the right to build.
There you go.
Then you can build as much as you want, as long as you have, like we said, capacity with the stations, rails, and blueprints for each station that you want to build, because you're going to keep spending those blueprints. But you can go from where you last stopped, like Emily's right here, and she can continue in any direction. Now, there's a couple options here. She can build into someone else's, another player's station. That's called making a connection. In that case, she still has to pay that first payment, but she wouldn't have to pay a blueprint because there's a station already there. And she won't put one of her stations down on that spot.
Correct.
You can go through that. And then you have to keep in mind, too, there's only places for certain tracks. You see all these white dashed lines. Those are where track goes. You can see Emily built right here. No one else will ever build right there because all of the tracks are taken. Some of them have dual tracks, but again, once they're taken, they're taken. So as the game is played, particularly at high player counts, things get really clogged up. And you are definitely going to be making connections because you might want to get over to that one side of the board where someone has built a development that she's been abusing all game, and you really want to use it too.
Exactly. And like David said, the reason you have to use connections as well is because you can't leave any spots untaken, right? So I can't move through a spot without putting a stop there or using a connection. So like if David, for the yellow right now, was trying to get to here, he can't. I've blocked his way. He's going to have to go through here, and I already have a stop there, so it's going to have to be a connection. But when you're building, as long as you have blueprints, as long as you have rails, and as long as you have stops to use, you can build as much as you want. Granted, so you might like decide like I'm going to try to build up, I'm just going to try to get as much as I can ready, and then make one big build action where I build a whole bunch of stuff on the board.
But you're never, like we said, you're never going to build a ton because of that limited supply that you have on your player board. So a big build may not be as big as you think. And keep in mind, too, what we were trying to say, all of those things are orchestrated together. So if you have a ton of rails, you can't do a build action and just build a bunch of rails and, I'll build the stations later. You have to build all of that together. You're not going to build rails without stations. You're not going to build stations without rails going to them. So it's a very delicate balance that you're trying to strike by coming around here to the build action and going, all right, I've got everything I want to do. But with that said, given how tight all this is, the economy, the timing going around here, inevitably you will get here and take a build action that's not exactly as big as what you'd hoped it to be.
Yes.
But then you've kind of got to get back into that cycle and hopefully get a better position with everyone else so that you're not on the short end of the stick next time.
Exactly. And so that's the final action. As we keep going around this, you can go around this up to 3 times. Every time you go and pass the start marker again, it'll take track for you. Once you've gone around it 3 times, though, you will then have to end your round.
Yeah.
And so the first person who does is going to get a little bit of a benefit.
Yep.
And then the second person's going to get a tinier benefit. And then the last person won't really be getting anything. So you're also thinking to yourself, like, all right, is this action really worth me taking another action, or should I just end early, right? Should I just be the first one for next round, so that way I get my first pick of what I'm going to do?
Yeah, because you have all of that. You could actually straddle rounds with a supply of things to use for that very purpose, because that bonus might be just that one little extra thing you could need to make your next build that much bigger.
Exactly.
You know, that one resource that you're looking for could really make the difference. But yeah, like we said, you're going to do that 3 times, each of 3 rounds, and then at the end of the game, you're going to do a fair amount of scoring, but not a ton. Some of the things that we've already pointed out, you probably understand, those agendas are going to score. Everyone's going to have up to 3. One of them will remain hidden.
Yes.
But the other 2 that you might take throughout the game are going to be face up. You're going to score those as long as you've put lobbyists on them at some point during the game. You're going to score the projects if you have lobbyists on those projects.
Yep.
And then there's going to also be some basic scoring. The basic scoring is your stations and your hubs. Effectively, every station that's next to a development is going to score you 1 point. Every hub that's next to a development is going to score you 2 points. And every hub that's next to at least 2 or more developments adjacent to it is going to score 3 points. Those are the points you're going to score for those. Now, that's not going to be necessarily a ton.
No.
I think in lower player count games, there may not be a ton of developments out on the board.
Well, and what ends up happening too is like you want to put out the developments because there's some pretty good powers that you can be using during the game, but you also want to be careful where you're building, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't just want to build willy-nilly and be like, okay, hopefully that'll score me points. It won't necessarily.
Right.
You really need to be building on places that go towards your agenda, go towards your projects, or are near some developments. Otherwise, you might be like, at the end, you know, I did all this stuff, but what did it really gain me anyway?
Exactly. And the other scoring, there are going to be those demand tokens that you may have taken with this action up here. If you built next to a development that has a demand token on it, you can take an action to spend some power to simply take a demand token from where you're next to and place it on this little track at the top of your player board. The more you collect, the more points, but it can be significant. Now, it would be a lot
to get that many.
To get 5 of them.
Yes, it
because
would.
power is not exactly free-flowing
No.
in terms of a resource. I guess unless you focus on that potentially.
You could, but you'd
could.
have to. You'd have to really think like,
Well, you'd
I'm
have
gonna
to
go
do that.
this
You'd
route.
also have to build still quite a bit to be
Yes.
next to that many developments.
Yes.
And then the last thing is going to be some points you get for any leftover coins you get.
Sure.
And you're going to get you're not going to have a lot. Just we'll let you know. You're going to spend your money. You get that at the beginning of each round or each year.
Yeah.
And it goes quickly.
Yeah, you have to really be careful on it because you can spend it a lot of ways. You can't gain it many ways.
Yeah, and what you'll find is sometimes we've talked already about like the decisions you've made to go around this track. There will also be times where you don't have any decision because if you're out of money, you know that you can't do this, you can't do this. There's certain things you won't be able to do. If you don't have permits, there's certain things you won't be able to do.
Exactly.
There are a few actions that are free, so you'll be able to do those. But believe me, those are quick trips around that rondel.
They are.
So you need to do that and hopefully do something to score some money to get back into the action.
Exactly.
So that is Terminus from Inside Up Games. It's, like I said, probably their heaviest game. If you followed what we've said here, you can probably appreciate that. But if you have any questions at all about the game, please make them in the comments below. We will get down there and answer whatever we can. Until next time, though, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.